I'm Kat.
And I'm Gabe.
And we're
the Ghouls next door.
Yeah.
Talking about that spooky stuff.
We're talking normal.
We are talking normal. And we're talking about representation. Talk about represent, baby. It's good. That was good.
Yeah.
And today we're talking specifically about mental illness. And we've touched on this
Many times.
Yes.
In our outrage.
Yes, it does come up. But it's something that, needed its own episode. And like we're doing for this whole series is that we are inviting people on. So it's not just us kind of up on our soapbox talking about it, right? We want to invite people who have a unique perspective and a valid perspective, right? As well. And today we have Marina. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for joining us in our podcast lair.
Glad to be here.
Appreciate it.
It's a cool lair. I like it.
Yeah. Why don't you tell our listeners a bit about yourself?
Cool. Yeah. I am Marina Ferdera. I'm actually a co-worker of Kat.
Yeah.
I'm the trauma and curriculum specialist at Sunrise of Philadelphia, Inc., an after-school program serving K-12 students in Philadelphia. And I've been involved with education for a long time, since I first came to Philly in 2009. So former Philly school teacher, after school teacher. Then I did some teaching of teachers in like professional development. And yeah, I know a lot about education and trauma as well.
Yeah, which is valid. That's why you're here.
Yeah, yeah.
So listeners, listen when she tells you stuff. Mm-hmm. She's a teacher, so she's going to do that thing where they clap once, and they're like, now you clap once. And that's what we're going to do to make sure you guys are paying attention. There will be a test at the end.
I'm all about assessment.
Yes. See if you guys learn so we can start making better films, because right now, let me just say that's a bit of a trash heap right now.
There was one good, and like probably others that were good. I feel like I've seen others that were good. The one that we're going to highlight was very good.
Yes.
And then there were like a good amount of them that weren't, and make us angry for many reasons that we will tell you later.
Mm-hmm. I think what we've kind of seen in our representation series is that one of the biggest problems with the lack of representation is that when there is representation and they are villainizing these people, like that's it, right? That's all we're seeing. This is the only perception of this type of person that we get, right? So when we villainize like the people of color, or villainize people with specific, jobs, right? And then that's all that people are seeing and being influenced by, then it will bleed into society and influence the way that we see them as well. But also the way that they see themselves, right? Like the whole point is like, the real horror and the real tragedy here is that we are monsterizing these people, these communities. Yeah. And when you do that, you just take away their humanity. You take away like people feeling like they deserve to be loved, honestly, which is a big problem specifically with this episode. But it's like, normalized. And that's just kind of what we're going to unpack today in this episode, and hopefully influence some future filmmakers to do what Jennifer Kent did in Babadook. I'm pretty sure it's Jennifer. Let me just
She did
check.
a good job where others have not.
So good of a job that it's like actually a horror movie I've seen, because I am actually afraid of most things and easily startled. And so my horror knowledge is like more in sort of like the classical like film history knowledge base. So glad to bring that up. But Babadook, top of my list of contemporary horror that I've seen.
Yeah, so it's made it. So hear that, person, if you are reluctant to listen to the Ghouls Next Door. You do not have to love horror. If anything, you should just love like hearing about how media does what it does.
Yeah.
And if it's doing a good job.
Across every genre.
Yeah.
Across every media platform.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put on those analysis goggles. We're going to start flipping tables.
Facts. Yeah, facts. We tell you facts. All the facts. Your facts. Stuff facts. About that spooky stuff. Yeah, spooky stuff.
All right, facts.
Yeah, let's talk about them. I'm going to throw a fact out there for the world.
Yes.
And it might shock you in that I feel like a lot of
this
people are like,
clickbait
I
right
don't
now?"
know anyone.
These
has
facts will be
this
unbelievable.
thing.
Please click for more information.
Yeah, so essentially, approximately 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. experience mental illness in a given year. What that equals is 46.6 million people.
Yes.
That's a lot of people experience mental illness in a given year.
Yeah.
So all these people out here like, what is that?
Yeah.
Like, it honestly baffles me sometimes how that ends up translating into like media, because so many people experience some variety
Yeah.
of mental health issue, even if it's on the lighter end or like a more severe end. It's just like, it's out there.
Yeah.
And I think there's just not enough like safe expression of this information, like be it in schools or workspaces. I mean, they're just recently making like burnout a medical thing.
Yeah. And
Where you
taking
can, like-
personal time, like,
Yeah.
is more emphasized.
Mental health
Yeah.
days as a thing that
Yeah.
people take, like vacation days. And
Yeah. Which is like a nice step in the right direction of trying to like better understand any sort of mental health issue.
Yeah.
But like, that was a big number. And I was just like,
Yeah.
what?
Well, when most people
lot of
hear
people.
mental illness, they immediately probably think of something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or multiple personality disorder or something, or DID, right? It's like they think these really big topics and they're like, me with anxiety, that doesn't count. And it's just like, no, hun.
Yeah.
It does. And I guess what they're also forgetting is that like, even if you have one of the bigger names of, you know, mental health issues,
Or
that doesn't
sensationalized.
maybe.
Maybe.
They're sensational. Like, there are countless people I know, like, can't even count on both my hands because there's too many that I know that have one of the more severe, like, mental health concerns and live more moderated lives, and that, like, they're self-checking themselves and they're doing a lot of, like, introspection and, like, if anything, are just very, like,
some of the best
informed.
people.
Yeah, like they really know themselves, and if they ever see themselves doing something they shouldn't be doing, or actively like checking themselves and making sure that like the people around them feel okay.
Yeah.
So like they're leading normal lives. They go to work.
Yeah.
Usually they won't disclose that they have
They don't
this
have to.
illness because they don't
Everyone
have to,
knows
for
legally.
one, but also because of this big stigma
Yes.
against it, in that like they're kind of painted as the big bad wolf. And I know when I was younger, I didn't really have a firm understanding of what bipolar disorder was, only later to find out that my mom had it. And like not understanding it at all, and then finally understanding it made me like forgive her for any bad thing that had ever happened, because I realized like, oh my goodness, this isn't because you don't like me. This is because like you're going through a thing.
You have a chemical imbalance.
This isn't you.
physiological thing.
This is not like because of me. And I was
It's
just
not a
like,
choice.
oh. Okay.
Did it feel kind of empowering? Kind of like, oh, I'm not imagining all this. There's a real thing going on here.
Yeah, no, it was like life changing. I like woke up as a human and then realized a lot of my own stuff, because like, you know, I have my own anxieties and like depression and all that other stuff. Like you hear all these scary words that make it seem like it's the worst thing in the world. If you find out you have that, it's life ending.
Yeah.
And it's not. And I guess like that's like the biggest thing, if anything, if you take away from this episode, is that like if you have a mental illness, that like your life isn't over.
Yeah.
And there's a reason you feel that way, because of that is what is constantly just being put out there. And that like it is challenging and you should feel valid in that, but it's like I also hope that like people have like a safe space where they can go and like tell people about it, and it's not like, oh, you're such a lot. Big burden with misunderstanding friends, Midsommar, where they're just like really rude about the fact that like you have a relationship with someone and you should be able to like share things that are upsetting you.
Yeah. And it's like, and furthermore, it's like, it's not even just that there's a substantial amount of people who have mental illness, right? It's also like, there's a lot of misconceptions on like the violent nature that people perceive people with mental illness to have, right? Which is drastically like manipulated and is untrue. Like like if anything is one of the biggest problems that I have in media that represents mental illness is this like misrepresentation of violence in this very specific community.
Yeah, specifically from mentalhealth.gov, only 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to individuals living with a serious mental illness.
3 to 5%.
Which is a very small number. That's not 46.6 million.
Yeah.
But it's a lot less.
And that's like 3 to 5 of like all violent acts, like of all kinds. So it's just like not people who cannot blame mental illness are going around and just murdering people to do that or to hurt people to do that. Yeah. And then the people who are actually mentally ill are odds are harming themselves more than anyone else.
Or harmed by others.
Yes.
Like far more than they'd be harming someone else.
Yeah, 10 times more likely to be victims of a violent crime than the general population, just because of like when you enter states where you aren't in good ways, you're either entering situations that might be more stressful or you're associating with people for self-medication reasons that would be unsafe.
Yeah. Or an easy target.
Yeah,
because
also that.
You may not have all your capacities in a given moment or time period or,
Marina, what are some things that you've seen in film? So you said you've watched some older things because you're not super into horror in the crazy way that we are. But I'm sure you've seen some of the things.
Oh, yeah.
Just tell us about your experiences.
Sure. Yeah. I think I'll like test how nerdy this show can go.
Oh, super nerdy.
Cool. I love it. So when we think of kind of early film, I think of those old silent movies and I think of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yes.
And the main character, we learn, spoiler if you haven't seen.
You're not allowed to be angry.
Yeah, if you haven't seen one of the earliest films of film history, we learn that the narrator is A, unreliable, B, quote, criminally insane, which was a real
which a
category.
Fun thing to say.
Yeah. So like we see that, horror, like other genres, but especially because horror is about atmosphere and there's less dialogue and it's all about the vibe and what things look like. So mental health or these diagnoses become shorthand for kind of bigger symbolic things like evil or bad guy or criminal. And that, mirrored a lot of social political practices of the time, that criminally insane was a thing, a legal term that was used back in the day. And it speaks to the fact that mental health is culturally specific. So, it changes in definition over time, not just because we know more, but because what is defined as healthy is different in different social contexts and different time periods. Something that might be seen as diagnosed as multiple personalities might be seen as spiritual possession in other cultures and totally normal and and a good thing and sort of like seen as sort of a connection to bigger, more important, fulfilling things. I should have looked this up at one point, but there was a diagnosis for someone who was enslaved and ran away repeatedly. And like, that was a mental health disorder. Yeah.
And why wouldn't you want to be here?
Exactly. Like, they just keep running away. They just crazy, just crazy.
There,
and so, and when we think about like, women are also being made made hysterical, both like just because everyone said so and sort of through cultural understanding. And then also just what we understand about medical practices of the time. A lot of medicine did make people insane, did make people neurologically damaged. We think of the level of quinine that people use. When we think of the level of arsenic that was in medication. When we think of oh man, I'm thinking of the Pharmacological History Museum in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Everyone should go. Best $5 museum you will ever go to.
Sounds really great, actually.
It's super cool. And they just they talk about medicine in the 17th and 19th century and the idea and just literally every the idea was that illnesses were so scary that you needed something really scary to treat it.
Yeah.
So this was like the literal language that our tour guide used. So that's why bloodletting was a really big thing. It's like, something really, you have to take drastic action. You gotta cut that blood out, get it out.
Lobotomies.
Leeches, you need them right now. And, and, just throw some quinine at that baby. This is not okay. So yeah, when we see lack of understanding, certainly, but also just different understandings of the world. Like I was saying, there things that might be seen as mental illness in one context might be seen as either normal or what caused it as something totally normal. So illness being a very subjective experience, like that's what culture shock is, right? I can be totally overwhelmed by something and then not okay and mentally unwell because of it, but it's literally the daily life of someone else.
Yeah.
So so I guess going back to your original question, movies, it changes over time. But the constant seems to be that it's used as shorthand for characters that are typically not the protagonist, though sometimes they are. Usually the antagonist is like a really quick and easy way to symbolically vilify somebody, or shorthand to kind of like put the protagonist into a victimized situation. So sort of like someone who gets put in a mental asylum, even though they're not supposed to be there, or because of the time period. And like, I'm thinking of this, it's not horror, but Girl Interrupted, of just sort of women could be committed very easily for things that we now would not see as particularly insane or unwell, but a normal reaction to an extraordinary situation.
So it's definitely historical, right? It's something we've grown up hearing. Like, how many haunted asylum like films do we have, or even just American Horror Story Asylum, which is going to get its own rant someday. It just has is just steeped in our fear of that. But what people don't realize is, like, when you think about the fear of like the asylum, right, where like, oh, it's haunted because of these crazed mental patients, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, no, the real horror is what they were doing to those crazed mental patients, right? It's just like, there are people in there who were being electroshock therapied, who were being over medicated, who were being lobotomized or abused sexually and taken advantage of because they, like, who was it that, and I wish I looked this up beforehand, who like broke his, like, he made his career in like journalism because he like
Geraldo Rivera,
yep,
in Staten Island.
Yes.
This is why we invited you. You know all the things.
Yeah, and it evolved into Real Life Horror Story.
Yeah,
and evolved into what is now like the Cropsey, like tale of Staten Island, and which is very real. And those places are ruins, and they still exist, and they're still there, and it's really depressing.
And it's like, and that wasn't just in Staten Island; that was happening all over. Anywhere there was like mental asylums, that's where it was, and it was terrifying.
Yeah, and I think that's like what we see a lot with like in films, but also just like at the history of asylums and things like that. That like nowadays there are lots of places that are safe spaces for, I don't know if like everywhere, but that if you're experiencing any sort of like severe mental health problem, that like you can go to for support, and it could just like kind of creates a fear of even seeking support, because then you're not sure that you will be safe in those places.
Yeah, the Mighties, which is like a website, has a mental health editor, Juliet Verizzi. I hope you're saying your name right. Sorry. She has an article titled "How American Horror Story Profits Off Mental Health Stereotypes," which is like, I was like, yes, finally someone is hearing me. This one more person recommends American Horror Story, I'm going to lose it. But she says about this, the way horror films depict psychiatry is such a big deal because these stereotypes don't stay confined to the film genre. People carry these stereotypes with them, whether they realize it or not, and it can have an effect on help-seeking behavior, right? So, like, while researching this episode, I found countless articles on mental health and horror specifically, where it was about not only villainizing the people, but villainizing the ways that they would get help, right? So like villainizing psychiatrists and like, you know, if there is an asylum that was supposed to be, an asylum, it's supposed to be like a safe space. It's supposed to be a place you go to get help. You know, and so they make like, you can't trust your psychiatrist, like they're gonna manipulate you, you can't like take the drugs because who knows what it is, and it's not like, you should just get better. So like when they villainize like those paths and routes to get to health or to contain your health, right, then that makes people who have mental illness be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah. And that's like from what you were just saying that, you know, that's historical. That's internal. That's cultural memory and like more powerful in like particular communities, particularly marginalized communities, of just like an existence that is made insane in many ways. Yeah. I think it's very scary. I think lots of communities have historical reasons for wanting to avoid the doctor. Yeah. And this is just another one of those marginalized communities that many of us are part of. And yeah. And also, I think it's also fascinating. I've been thinking about what you said at the beginning, Kat, of how many people live. One in five. One in five people. It's like 20% of the US.
Yeah.
And like, what does it mean that we villainize and sort of that's a pretty huge percent of the population.
And so we do that to like, just if you talk about every single bracket of the population that we talk about in our representation series, the marginalized, the group that is being just thrown under is the majority, and that's like
what does it mean if we're villainizing the majority of the population? That's like a weird question that I've just been I'd had that in my head since you said it. What does it mean if we live with such a high number of our community being unwell? Yeah, that to me is really interesting. And also, it like we're talking about it. It's coming up, but I'll just like name it as well. There's the whole intersectionality of it as well. So there's those distinctions that compound each other, or gender, or gender identity, or sexual orientation that then
race.
Oh my gosh, yes. And how those things just like layer on top of each other to make this more funky way of living through an illness, and a more we realize that a lot of times what we call mental illness or like a behavioral disability is just your body's normal reaction to a really abnormal situation. Something your body and your mind are not equipped to handle. When I think of other horror that I've seen, and if we then realize that, if someone is behaving in a way that is seen as creepy or dangerous or unsafe or threatening, to then think through the fact that they probably experienced something really horrifying themselves, that just sort of undoes the whole premise of a villain. So how do we have compassion for our villains, especially in the genre of horror? It's something that doesn't really work unless you have a monster or something supernatural like a demon. But when we talk about humans, like humans can be pretty awful and horrifying. And they don't need a mental illness to do those things. Yeah. They can be pretty awful and horrifying and be perfect in their right state of mind.
And just think what they're doing is right, even though it's like the worst thing. Yeah.
And also like to turn that on its head as well. Also a horrifying movie, but not a horror movie, documentary, The Act of Killing. What's really illustrated there? It's about, it's a documentary about a praised veteran in Cambodia who basically led a death squad. And so it's a documentary about present day at the time of the filming, present day, like what happens when fascists are the victors.
Okay.
And basically this documentarian was having reenactments of this veterans' victories. So basically just these mass slaughterings were being reenacted.
Yikes.
And the guy started going into this like fugue state. And what was really being underscored is that the act of killing, both like figurative because they were performing it, but also literal, like he killed all these people, is harmful to him.
Yeah.
The act of taking a life is a harmful act to the self. And that also further damages someone. So someone may be starting out doing something that they think like, oh, I have every right to be doing whatever. And really they're harming themselves even further, which is another fascinating aspect of just violence and evil.
It's kind of thinking like the problem that we have with, I mean, there's lots of it with representation here, is that we're just kind of putting this blanket statement over an entire populace, right? And where each case is very unique and there's different elements to it. There's different experiences and you know, traumas and all of that are on each individual. And to just put this like blanket, like all of you are like this, right? And it that's where the problem lies, because then they're no longer a person. They are just like one of those, right? Which is like an other and monster. And it really is showing in horror when they use that. So there's always this kind of idea of like, if someone is revealed in a film to have some sort of mental illness, you know, immediately that they're going to be bad, right? That something's going to go wrong. Like when I remember they used it to gloss over in, what was the roommate?
Yeah, the roommate
movie.
which is like, ugh.
They just like threw it in that she had some mental, like they found pills or something that showed that I think she had bipolar disorder. And they were like, oh, that explains like that she must be evil. Like,
Sure.
right? Yeah. Or
like an
or
example. An example of how a perpetrator can be a victim as well.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll say I don't see that a lot in horror enough, where they're not there's a villain that has a mental illness, they're not creating full characters.
Yeah.
They're creating them as they have this illness, and that illness is every part of them. Like they don't have a story, a backstory, much of one at least. It's usually like, oh, their parents seem a little neglectful, so that's why nothing good ever happened. Like, you know, like you don't actually usually ever get a chance to feel for the antagonist. And it's whenever they have any sort of like mental illness, which is usually not accurately placed upon them, in that it's like they don't even look up the symptoms, you know. They just like be like, you're schizophrenic, and it's like,
What?
It's shorthand. So like to become a plot device that they didn't think much about to make things happen.
Yeah, it's like a lazy, just like
it's real lazy.
Yeah. Oh, it's very
And
lazy.
we see it so much that it's like you would think they'd be like, oh, we've done that, you know. We're tired.
Okay, have you seen films recently? Have you seen any of the
I've seen all of them, and they're
and the
Every
same
film.
story redone over and over and over
I
again?
guess that's fair. We're not trying to be creative anymore.
we're
It's
done
like
that.
the whole time.
Or opportunity to write a script, like take one that does it badly and like rewrite it so that it actually makes sense.
Marina, you just made our whole YouTube
Yeah,
channel.
that's like our entire life. Is that
I'll
that's
be
what
the
we
producer.
aspire. We're here.
It'll be great.
Yes. Well, it's like it's definitely a tired trope to do that twist, right? I'm
It's not
looking
a
at you,
twist.
high
You
tension.
predict it in like high
Okay,
tension.
think about high tension, right? Where it's like we have this whole film that would have been great. It's just a slasher. It's whatever. To be like, surprise, she was crazy and she's a lesbian. And we're like, wait, what? Hold on, pick one thing. Also, both of these are not valid for what you just said.
It's very problematic. The whole thing you just did in 5 minutes.
But it often happens where it's just like, surprise, this person was crazy the whole time, right? Like, you
Also-
shouldn't have believed us.
Also, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, because that's exactly the end. We're like, oh, the narrator was the crazy one the whole time. Ah.
Exactly. It's been done at one of the first films ever.
Yep.
I think we can say it's done now, 2019. But
It's
unfortunately
not.
it's not, and we're going to dive
Midsommar
into
came out this year.
to films that have. So we're talking Babadook and Midsommar, because we just have so many. I like this idea that we're doing one good, one bad, like we used to do sometimes. So we get lucky.
Yeah.
Because it really helps us feel like motivated to continue on.
Yeah, there's hope.
Films. Yeah, films. Yeah, films. We watched some films. Now let's talk about those films. And all that spooky stuff. And all that spooky stuff.
All right, so we watched this film, which was great, and I still love it. I saw it twice now, and I'm like, what? It's still great. Everything. Babadook.
I've seen this one too.
Babadook. Duck.
Even though I'm afraid of it. I saw it in the full daylight.
Did I say it wrong? Babadook?
No, you
Babadook?
did whatever. It's
Babadook.
Australian. You just
Okay. Well, 2014, I think.
Yep.
Directed and written by a lovely lady, Jennifer Kent.
Yes, this is her first feature film. She did a great job.
Yeah, knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
First one?
Yeah.
Dang. Right on.
Yeah, right?
There's hope for us yet.
So it is about a widowed mother plagued by a violent death of her husband, battles with her son's fear of a monster lurking in the house, but soon discovers a sinister presence all around her. And so I guess what we see with the Babadook is that you really have a wonderful representation of the mind's way of processing really extensive trauma,
Grief.
Loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depression.
Postpartum.
Like postpartum.
Yeah. If for someone, this would be a really interesting sort of, certainly watch it under the supervision of a therapist. But I'm really curious if there's anyone out there who has lived with postpartum, who has seen this movie and has thoughts about it. I have not experienced postpartum, but I know people who have, and I'm just really curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, like if they feel it's an accurate representation of those things.
Postpartum is used a little bit in Hereditary. There's a few things I didn't say. I'm not going to say it now because it's too late. We talked too much about it.
And like not as a tool for healing, but as a tool to kind of explain to someone else what you're going through.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of if I had experienced something, so I have dyslexia, and I've been in dyslexia simulations, and that was true horror for me. I had to run out of the room because it was too effective. I was like, no, I can't. No, thank you. But I thought it was an accurate representation to someone trying to understand what it's like.
Yeah.
So
To see if if it seems correct.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, to give some context for the movies, we're going to do some spoiler times as we do. But please see this one if you haven't. I mean,
Yes.
it's from 2014. You had a little bit of time. It used to be on Netflix. It's not anymore.
Maybe like pause, go watch it.
Yeah.
And then
come
finish
back.
this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because spoilers.
Because here it goes.
Yeah, but it was really good. So Amelia is suffering from the grief and cannot fully love and accept her son until she accepts her husband's death. And that's like the theme of the whole movie.
Yeah. Like he died when he was driving her to the hospital to give birth to her son. So he's dying while she's bringing in new life and can't properly process that her husband is dead, and time to like properly like love and just be like, I'm the mother now. Like it's just like I have to put on these pants and just do the basics of the job, but I haven't even really gotten to deal.
Yeah. And associates the son and the birth with the loss.
Yeah.
And like not logically, but like mentally blames the son for the death of the dad in many ways. Because it's like they wouldn't have been in the car if that fool wasn't being born.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and then you also get like
raining.
that. So the little boy is a fantastic actor.
He's amazing.
Oh my gosh, like should win awards upon awards. But you know, he's not an easy kid. You know, you're witnessing their relationship. You're witnessing like the way he's processing the trauma, and like also like just you know, being a little kid and having a mom who is trying, but like you can just tell that the energy isn't there and that she's really struggling, and like he's trying to process that too. And
This is all he
like,
knows.
that's all he knows. He doesn't know what's going on, or if it's normal, or if mom is sick, or if he's sick, you know, like there's like all these elements that's like very hard for a small child to process in and of itself. But the way he's dealing with it is only hanging out with his mom. So he kind of has that thing where he talks like an older kid, like he talks like an adult to other kids and scares them.
Yes.
Has a very active imagination
He wants to
as
fight
a child.
to protect her because clearly she is like she's
She's his
fragile.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in like need of protection, the father is not there. So I mean, I guess in some like cultural ends, he feels like he needs to protect mom as the man of the house potentially.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just this really emotional experience.
Yeah, he has a few really good lines in there that really cut to the point. Like he says, like he's in the basement playing with his father's items, and his mom gets upset, like you can't touch those things.
Oh, yeah.
And he, at some point, you know, this guy comes over, and the kid is obviously upset, and he essentially says, like, she won't even let me have a dad. And it's not like he wants her to move on and have some new guy. It's like she won't even share with me who he was so that I can also love him.
And mourn him.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing that, there's so many things this movie gets right. Just about grief and loss and development and how kids, so before kids even have the capacity to process these ideas and thoughts, they have to depend on the adults to like teach them how to process these things. And like there's this thing called mirror neurons, and we're wired to behave the way other people behave and expect them to behave the way we behave, especially if we're children. And the idea being that if a person smiles, the baby will smile. And if the baby smiles and you don't smile, that baby's going to get really upset because their brain literally can't handle it, because their brain is saying, I'm smiling. You're supposed to be smiling. Something must be real bad if you're not smiling.
Like we're in danger.
We're in danger. This is not good. And I think we're seeing a kid who, this is like 7 years into that. And so the kid has come up with his own coping mechanisms to mediate that, and is coming up empty a lot of times because his mom won't meet him where he's at. And because like his family is being attacked, like verbally, and people whispering about his mom when she walks away. And the other thing, oh my God, the other thing this movie gets so right is how critical others are of her timeline of healing or lack thereof. I remember that was something that stuck out to me a lot about that movie, that there were a lot of sort of, I guess, timelines or kind of benchmarks. Like I think the kid was going to be starting school.
He was in school. I think it was like
he'd been expelled, maybe,
he'd been expelled.
He had gone to like kindergarten, first grade. He was turning 7.
Yeah, he was. It was birthday. That's what it was. It was the birthday, and like, and everyone. There were so many times when people were saying like, it's been 7 years. Yeah, and it's just sort of like, well, every year is the anniversary of it. Every year is her kid's birthday. And like there is no set timeline for you to be over something. Yeah. We can be upset by the smallest of things for the rest of our lives. We can be moderately able to cope with the most horrific things in a very quick period of time. It is very different for every person. Yeah. And that was something that I thought this movie got so right, of just people being unwilling to accept that this was still really raw and fresh, as if it had just happened moments ago for her. That, in terms of her reality, was just not what anyone was willing to recognize. Yeah. So powerful.
Yeah, the writing is amazing. And even just like cinematically, right? Like we're looking at this very drab, almost like Tim Burton-esque home. Like everything is gray. Everything looks
blue
like
and dark
dusty. And she always looks tired and just withered, and she's like in white and is just like just hating everything. And it's just like when you imagine, when I heard like, oh, he died on the way to her giving birth, I was just like, so this entire kid's existence has been this woman who tenses up every time he hugs her, who like is annoyed by his existence as just being a kid, right? Like there's this interpretation with people who are always just like, when you watch Babadook, it reminds you not to have kids because like they picture this kid as being annoying and he's loud and there's like the meme of like where she's like, why can't you be normal? And then he's just screaming. But what you miss out is like right after that scream, he like totally just snaps and is overwhelmed by his anxiety into the point where he has a seizure. Yeah. Right. And it's like this doctor being like, no, he is under a lot of pressure for some reason. What is going on? And it's because his like anxieties and his need to protect her has now personified into this literal monster. But it's not even just his monster. It's her monster that he is trying to fix because he's the man of the house. He's trying to save his mom. He keeps warning her. He's like, do you want to die? Like he keeps trying to like shake her awake to be like, why are you not like handling this? Because I don't understand. Like this is your whole life. But there's this the most impactful line, in my opinion, that really, really hits me is at the end, he has her tied up when she's possessed by the Babadook. And he says, I know you don't love me. The Babadook won't let you, but I love you. Right. And it's this idea that like, he's like, I know that's not you. That's like been treating me this way. Not just like what we've seen on screen, but forever. He's like, I know that this version of you doesn't love me because it doesn't know how, but there's a part of you that does. And I'm going to fight to get it back. I'm going to wait. We're in this together. And it's like this.
Yeah, like we're a team.
It's very hopeful. And it's like very empowering. Like the 7-year-old. Yeah. And he's the hero in men. I think they're the heroes together because it is between the two of them that they figure stuff out and make it work and learn how to live with their monster. But like he's a really brave kid. And that's another thing that it got really right of the kids of parents with unprocessed trauma, often resulting in mental health challenges. The kids become caretakers, not just of themselves, but of their parents. It's something that's just, I can identify with for sure of just my mom lived with, and I came from a 2-parent household. So like, it wasn't like, it was just me and my mom, but I can definitely identify and have memories of just sort of like caretaking can be something as massive as what he's doing of like an intervention of tying her down, but it could also be something as small as kind of modulating your own emotions. It could be something of sort of saying, oh, well, I'm going to take my shoes off when I walk into the house because mom probably has a migraine and she's going to fly off the handle. And like, she's really tired. I don't want to bother her. And they got that so right. The other thing that I love, oh my God, you touched on it of when, in the way we hear the Babadook, like that's exactly how intrusive thoughts work. And the main character's reaction every time she hears it is, it's so dead on because like she hears it, but when we think of intrusive thoughts and anxiety, you don't necessarily hear it audibly, but it's the idea that it comes at the worst times. It's completely surprising. It never makes sense as to why this thought came on. And her reaction is always so spot on. It's just sort of her face and her reaction just always said in the movie, are you serious right now?
Yeah.
What has happened? Are you serious now? Like, this timing is terrible. It's just, oh my God. It was very authentic. It really hit home for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there was that one part, I guess, when the book comes back after she puts it outside and is ripped it up and is very upset. And it comes back and it says, the more you deny, the stronger I get. And it's kind of like that idea of like, you go until you can't anymore. You just keep pushing it down and pretending you're okay and this isn't real, or like whatever is like haunting you, like whatever memory or like stress is like, I just have to put it away. It's not going to affect me. I just need to get through today.
Yeah.
And that just compounds and compounds and compounds on itself. And it just gets worse and worse and worse if you don't ever even just name it.
Yeah.
You put it all in the basement and you don't look at it, it's going to feel really fresh because you're not dealing with it. You're just pretending it's not real until you have to deal with it.
Yeah.
She always said he's not real and like don't mention his name and all of that. And it's not until she does confront it, right, that what is really amazing about this film is that the Babadook isn't defeated. Like it isn't like it's not just like gone, right? We don't just get cured of this Babadook. Like, right, what we do is he's in the basement and she's feeding it worms, right? Which is like could be an analogy for like medicating, right? Like I'm taking care of it so that it's staying cool. And sometimes it snaps at her, but it is getting better. And that's like what he says, like, oh, but today is better.
Yeah.
And then someday she can be open with him and he can see it and he can understand it fully, but for right now he trusts her and believes that she's taking care of it because she finally acknowledged it. And that's where the power came from. It's like, yes, this is real, this is happening, but I have the power ultimately and I'm in control.
Yes. Agreed. Yeah, it's not over. And like we were talking about the thing that Midsommar did wrong about the sister of sort of like it's an ongoing, lifelong process of maintenance and kind of she makes friends with it that's sort of what I thought was really cool. Like we feed things to like sustain them and to appease them. And sometimes it's a chore and sometimes it's an offering and sometimes it's like you're sharing a meal. Like I sometimes wonder if she goes down with some ice cream or something. It's like, here's your worms. I'm going to have some ice cream. Like, is this, it's not like a friendship, but it is a conversation. It's a relationship and it's kind of making friends with the icky part inside of her and giving it the attention it deserves, not just the attention that it's demanding, but it really deserves this. It deserves to like have a place in her home and in her kid's life. And yeah, I love that movie. It's really good.
I mean, so you said a lot of stuff that I was like also just very much feeling in terms of like how the son was dealing with it. I was just like, oh my gosh. Yeah, that is what happens. Like when you live in a house with like a parent who is going through things like this and from speaking from my own experience, just feeling like you have to accommodate or one, just like you have to protect them. You have to alter your behavior so that they will hopefully feel like they can help themselves or like, you know, you don't want to add to that. You don't want to be a contributor.
Everyone else is like stomping her down. So like, I can't do that.
I have to be the one person who doesn't because we're a team. Yeah. And it's like, there's the beautiful end of that. And there's like the mildly like can be toxic end of that. And there's just so many ways to look at it. Yeah. But it's just like, it's very real that like as a kid, the mirroring, like I was just like, oh my God. Yeah. And it's like, you want to make sure that like you're a part of this and like making sure they're okay and like acknowledging that they can get better. So the whole thing.
And it was like,
I love this movie.
Like I think it was, you know, in Midsommar, Danny is the Samuel to Terry's Amelia, which is the mom's name, right? Like she was the person who was trying to take care of her and protect her and was like aware of any of her triggers or what did you call it?
It triggers, it's fine.
That she's aware of those things, and that's why she was also taught and like in high strung because she's always under that pressure. So whereas with this kid, they got to kind of alleviate that together and conquer that together as a team. Danny never really got that. So she was kind of like left alone, having felt like a failure because she was the one light for Terry, and she failed everyone. And we never really got that. She was literally just this anxiety puddle who had to find solace in this cult as opposed to being like, you're a real person who suffered a lot of trauma and you needed support just like you have always been the support or you're gonna crumble. And it was kind of like not done properly. But this one does it great.
And it continued the cycle of violence.
Yeah.
Like her boyfriend was doing emotional violence to her, and so she did physical violence to him. It became like retribution and like a revenge situation, which is not healing necessarily. Like again, cultural context. But it is. We do know that the act of killing another person is psychologically harmful to the person doing the killing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And
No.
so she did not heal at the end of that.
She harmed herself in a new way.
Yeah, now she's in a cult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brand new way of hurt.
Yeah, this is really great. Just to point out, a lot of the information we got for Babadook was from Spencer, who's a contributor for The Artifice, which is a website. And, you know, he really just talks about like essentially everything that we said. And I do like that in this film, her being like mentally ill didn't make her a villain at all.
Yeah.
She was a protagonist.
And they never give her a diagnosis.
Yeah.
There's never a moment when they're like, you're depressed or you haven't dealt with your grief. It's just sort of obvious from the way the story is told. And like the other thing, this is like the one thing I just remembered that, again, I didn't see Midsommar, but I really loved the other implications of it, that like there's other dangers lurking because of the Babadook, mainly that her son's being suspended and her son might be taken from her by like Child Protective Services. And so like those are real horrors in people's lives. And I thought it did an incredible job of like, that's a good example of mental health being symbolic of other real world things or of mental health filling in for like all these other sort of the cascade effect of people not understanding or creating spaces for healing. Like the result is further punitive action. The result is you're going to be suspended, or the result is your child's going to be taken from you. Yeah. And those things just, again, sort of further the circle of harm.
Yeah. Or the sister stopped talking and the cops just laughed her off when she asked for help. Like, and that's a thing that happens as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great highlight of like how important it is to teach empathy to children at a very young age. Just because when it's not instilled kind of universally, you get this just really profound lack of understanding. Yeah. And just because it's not something you have directly experienced, that like if a character who is around her is only witnessing loss from another person, that like it's just highlighted throughout like them not understanding what that meant like for her, and how like grief can be different for everyone, and like how you process things, as you said, does not have a timeline. And if you don't have the empathy to try to understand it, that it's just like very difficult to create those spaces. Like,
and
even,
very easy to villainize.
Yeah. It's just like, that's how you have movies like Midsommar. And that like, we just don't have a lot of understanding about things that are not personal to ourselves. That's how we have people who villainize people of color and like immigration and all sorts of, it's just like choosing to not understand any other human being other than yourself. Yeah. Or just not having the capacity to, because you haven't lived in spaces that have allowed that.
Or to do it safely, because sometimes acknowledging that then leads to a lot of guilt and shame, because one might realize, oh, I've been a perpetrator. Yeah. And that's like more often true. Yeah. I can identify that, of like learning about all these things and really regretting a lot of decisions I made as an educator, and like not realizing I was probably harming some kids.
Yeah, because of the lack of trauma-informed practices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Feelings. Yeah, feelings. Yeah, I said feelings. Let's talk about feelings. Okay. And all that spooky stuff. I love spooky stuff.
So if it's bad, Christian... And if it's good, because the boyfriend in Midsommar's name is Christian, and he was just real rude.
He's very bad in all aspects.
Yeah. And then if it was good, Samuel, because he was the best son ever.
He was such a good boy. So for the topic of how mental illness is used in horror movies overall, not our films right now, just overall in the history of time, is it a Christian or a Samuel for you guys?
Christian.
Yeah.
Ugh.
It's bad.
I haven't even seen the movie, and I think it's Christian.
Yeah. Yeah, like you just believe us, he's bad. It's it's definitely a Christian on that. That sounds awful. Well, I mean, kind of like in the way that, in historically, there have been some Christian practices that have been bad for those with mental illness. Just also, we did a whole episode on exorcisms. But besides that, just like, again, there's an entire article on how American Horror Story's been doing this for a long time, and everyone keeps talking them up. But it's historical. Like, if there's someone who's diagnosed on screen in a horror movie, you know what role they're going to play. And it's the fact it's an excuse. It's trash.
Yeah, and I'm not going to speak to my mom's experience, but this is something that she has said to me, in that she was so scared to tell other people.
Yeah.
She's terrified. Like, she's like, they're going to think I'm crazy, or they're going to not want to, like, it's a deal breaker, And it's just like, wow. In, like, some ways it's like, yes, it's a commitment, but it's just like, just these films just continue to make her and others feel that way, and that just upsets me on such a fundamental level.
Yeah.
Just because in defense of her, but then also, like, for my own things, where it's just like, not like, it's rude that, like, my biggest fear is having some of those issues because of, one, how I've seen her struggle, just like having to, like, deal with that and, like, her life, and because of this, like, that, like, it has been so vilified culturally that it's just, like, terrifying to even accept that I could have segments of that disorder. And it's like, yeah, I do, like, but I just deal with, like, you have to deal with it and hope the world gets better.
Yeah. And it's like,
sees
it
things
seems
better.
like the end of the world if you're diagnosed with something like that. Like, it makes me think of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, where she's finally diagnosed with...
Beautiful show.
It's such a great show. It does really great with mental illness, but she gets diagnosed with, I think, borderline personality disorder.
Yeah.
And she has like she's like, there's no way. And she like Googles it, and she has like this whole idea and personification of herself. And then the therapist is like, it's not that at all. And we can work with this. Like, this is something we can deal with.
Now that we've named it, we can work on it.
Now we know what to do. Yeah. Now we know the steps. And it, like, that was like such a great moment in TV that I was like, I want this all the time. And it's either like they're monsterized on TV. I feel like I made up that word, but that's what it is. So I think there's a lot of room to grow. So what about the film?
Samuel for Babadook.
All the way. Sam all the way. For Babadook.
He's such a good son. Even if he starts out a little annoying, it's just like, you're just a kid.
Yeah, he was just a boy.
Yeah, and like, so much is happening to you, and you're just processing it. And like, people need to learn to forgive characters who are just going through things. Yeah. Like, and then, like, that's okay, and like, maybe they'll be different later.
He did really well considering the fact that his mother has been like that his entire life.
Yeah.
Like, he could have come out like aggressive. He could have been like angry and abusive to her because he could have lashed out. Like, there could have been other alternatives, or he could have just been really sad. But he was like,
or might have been if we saw him as like a 14-year-old instead of a 7-year-old.
Yeah,
like the longer that goes on, the greater the harm. So
but thank you so much, Marina, for joining us.
I'm so glad I came.
This was awesome. My mind is blown.
You're both wonderful too.
My brain is like, oh my God, there's so much information. I love it so much.
Yeah.
And I
There's
feel
so
like
much.
we have to cover this again one day.
Yeah.
It's like, you
There's
just
so
do it all
much.
one day.
I can come back. Yeah.
Yes.
Patreon. We haven't talked about it in a minute, but we can have a whole separate thing with Marina.
Yes.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
What? Can I leave this basement?
No, never.
Never.
Listeners, if you have questions or you just want to praise Marina for her amazing brain and her big heart, then please email us at theGhoulsNextDoor@gmail.com. Thank you again so much. This has been very enlightening. I feel like I was totally worried that I was just going to be like red hot raving mess. And you were like, yeah, this is valid, but then also here's some history. I was like, oh my God, I forgot about history.
History is the
Remember
coolest.
history. Yeah, so thank you for knowing Kat.
Yeah. You're welcome for knowing Kat.
We both know me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the peanut butter to this great sandwich friendship.
Woo!
That was a weird
It
thing. I
was
said.
good. I
It kept
love it.
going too.
Friendship.
Well, Kat,
Don't get married.
delete your kids.